Welcome to the Black Kitchen Podcast, a mini-series made to celebrate the winding, vibrant history of Black food culture in the U.S. My name is Adrian Miller. I'm a culinary historian, food writer, and soul food scholar, and I'll be your host. Let's get into it. When Chef Christian Gill was first getting started at the ripe old age of 5 years old, he made his first cooking mistake, emptying a container of chili powder into his mom's already seasoned dish. He just wanted to do what she did. He wanted to season with confidence. It's a lesson he's carried with him his whole career, including during his tenure as head chef of Cincinnati's Boomtown Biscuits and Whiskey, where he's sure not to overseason, but very likely to let the ancestors cook through him. Here's my conversation with Chef Gill. I'm here today with Chef Gill of Boomtown Biscuits and Whiskey. What's going on, Chef?
Not a lot. Just trying to hang in there with all of the Rona.
Oh, yeah, I understand. It's tough, man. So tell me about this restaurant's name, Boomtown Biscuits and Whiskey. Tell me about the journey.
So Boomtown Biscuits and Whiskey is a very deep, thematic, immersive brand experience that is based on elevated comfort food. It's about the pioneers and prospectors that went out west in search of, their new life and staking their claim on something, whether or not that was gold, silver, or just their own land and their version of freedom. And so they went out west and they would make a mess of biscuits at their camp and then go up on top of a mountain and prospect for gold, mine for gold, and eat their leftovers from whatever they had for breakfast, and then come down off the mountain, pass a jug of whiskey around the fire and tell their stories. So that is the premise of our brunch forward restaurant. And we found ourselves expanding into just even more cuisine and being able to offer more, dinner items, more shareables, just a touch of everything, really. But keeping it focused on comfort food from around the world, not just the Deep South and not just the West.
So tell me about your connection to the West. Did you grow up in the West? I'm just curious how you got connected to that history.
I actually did not grow up in the West myself. There is one of my great uncles was a Buffalo Soldier, and my grandparents had a picture, like a portrait of him hanging in their house. And so I do know that I have some affiliation there. But a lot of this story was actually created by my best friend, who actually is passed away, who was the co-founder of Boomtown Biscuits and Whiskey. His name was PJ Newman. And he was the one that originally had the idea for the brand, for the story. And I was the one that had the culinary aptitude that was appropriate for this story. And together, he came up to me. I was the executive chef at the Cincinnati Art Museum. And he came up to me and at an event and was just like, "Hey, I know we're friends and good friends, but you want to do this restaurant with me, like biscuits?" And I was just kind of like, "Yeah, no, well, let's do it." I enjoy the museum, but I would like to have a stove. So I ventured out with him, and we literally went coast to coast, eating every biscuit we could encounter, every mac and cheese, every version of greens, be there collard, turnip, kale. We literally ate our way from Florida to Maine to Portland, Oregon, to California, and all kinds of places in between. This was something that I've learned and have grown in the last 3 or 4 years, I guess specifically 4 to 5 years. And that is that restaurants require or should require themselves to have more than just food and beverage. It needs to be a brand experience. It needs to be an experience from start to finish, from customer service, guest attentiveness, to the attention to detail with the food. And that is something that PJ really instilled in me on our adventures across the nation. And that's something that still rings true with our food and my food today.
Yeah, as a soul food scholar, all of that eating that you did, I call that research.
Research.
So for those who are not familiar, could you just say a little bit more about what a Buffalo Soldier is?
Yes. So a Buffalo Soldier, they had their own, that's an all black troop of cavalry that were stationed Midwest, out west. And the Buffalo Soldiers were actually integral in the Alamo, in that the Mexican American War, as well as just policing and sheriffing to a degree out west, and defending not only Native Americans from outlaws and other unsavory people, but establishing and assisting African Americans that wanted to be pioneers and frontiers to move out west.
Now, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. So still the South, kind of close to the Mason-Dixon line, but I'm still the South. I'm still Southern. And my dad grew up in Southern Georgia, like deep Southern, around Savannah. I'm talking about like Valdosta and Ocilla. And so there's a lot of very deep South culture and rich food tradition that also persists through the story that I tell with food at Boomtown. And not just, the bluegrass and some of that Appalachian tendency that I also have. And then, of course, I have family members that grew up in the South in Louisiana and Mississippi. So there's a touch of Creole there as well. It's on my mama's side. I actually started cooking when I was like 5 or 6 with my mom and my grandmother. So I grew up in a single parent household, and for the most part of my life, my grandmother was the one that taught me how to make biscuits. My mom was the one that taught me that I should season with confidence. Because that's literally it's what the elders did. It's what they do. There are no recipes. There are no guidelines. It is feeling and soul and cooking from the heart. And while I don't find it hard to be able to cook from the heart or use a recipe, like I tend to cook, like I said, season with confidence. And so I try to instill that in my crew as well.
So tell me about your earliest cooking memory. Is that making biscuits or was it something else?
My earliest cooking memories were of being in my grandmother's kitchen, and learning how to make chili. So not Cincinnati Greek ragu bolo, like no, not that, like actual chili. Chili powder and garlic, salt, and stewed tomatoes, all of that. And I remember that, like, I saw my grandmother put chili powder in the chili pot, and I was like, oh man, like, I want to do that. And I didn't ask without hesitation. I saw her put it down, and she walked away, and then I picked it up, and I just dumped the rest of the container in. And then I got cracked over the head with a rolling pin because she had already seasoned it. And like, even though I was excited and I was just dumb. I didn't know any better. I didn't know you're not supposed to touch that pot. I didn't know you're not supposed to stick your fingers. I didn't know any of that until right then. Like, it's like all of that innate subconscious knowledge of what you should not do when you mess with your your big mama, like, yeah, all of that, all of a sudden with that crack on the head, it was like Tweety Bird and Sylvester where, get cracked in the stars. And then it was that. And that is the earliest memory I have of quote unquote cooking and learning how to cook with my grandmother. With my mom, the first thing I learned how to cook was cookies. Like, I learned how to bake cookies from scratch. Cookies, pies, baking was always been my mom's thing. Like, even though my grandmother's biscuits are bar none the best biscuits I've ever had and ever will have, I know everybody was like, my grandma make the best. And even though that, like, my mom's thing was baking, and my earliest memory of baking, like, I got the cookies and like I mixed up the cookies. It was a combination of chocolate chip cookies and some sugar cookies. And I got them scooped out. I got them on the baking sheet, and then I stuck them in the oven. And the oven's hot. Use an oven mitt. Stuck them in the oven. Closed the oven. And somebody showed up at our door. Like one of my uncles or my aunts showed up, and I turned around and I was really excited to just go say hi to them and go see them, what they were about, and see if they had any candy for me or whatever. And then all of a sudden I smell smoke. I see black smoke. My mom runs in the kitchen, just stiff arms me, runs in the kitchen, opens the oven door, and there's the oven mitt on the bottom on the heating element in the electric oven, just on fire. And I was just like, ah! And like I'm trying to go get water out of the sink. And my mom is just stiff arm checking me, and she's just like, get back, and then takes like a whole box of salt and just dumps it on, and it goes out. And I was just like, I thought salt was for eating. Why are we using salt? And that was right before she got a hold of me and wore me out for doing that, for not paying attention. And never burned an oven mitt or towel, nothing ever again. Nope. I learned right then and there.
Well, I was going to say, I've started to notice a pattern, cooking and punishment. So, but that's okay. We can move on. So tell me, you're growing up with your mother and your grandmother. Did they both shape your palate, or give us a sense of kind of what you were eating during your childhood?
So a lot of my childhood, we'll start with my grandmother. A lot of my childhood eating in my grandmother's house was your classic Southern traditional soul food cooking. And that's like a lot of what my grandmother made was what her mother taught her. We even, we had rabbit and stuff. Like my grandfather and my uncles, like they hunted, and it was like, it was whatever was available. Like my grandparents had a small farm, and they had chickens at one point, and they had like a nice piece of acreage with a garden. And I was part of that rear end of mine growing up was to tend that garden and to learn how to be a proper gardener, because you have to have respect for your food. So that's the only way that you truly appreciate and understand it and can manipulate it more, is if you start from the ground up, like no pun intended.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my grandmother's like rear end was that, whereas my mom was the one that introduced me to international cuisine. So my mom would take me to like Thai restaurants, or like, we went to a Chinese restaurant. We went to a traditional Mandarin or Cantonese restaurant, which we had those in Lexington, Kentucky. You would think that we didn't, but that's what we had. And like, or we'd go to a traditional Mexican restaurant, like street food, street tacos. And so my mom was always that guide in my culinary rearing. And that's the primary way that I've grown as a chef, is by eating everything. And that's how my mom and my grandmother really developed my palate from a young age.
All right, let's talk biscuits. Now, look, I know not to get the secrets, but if you can, tell me how your biscuits are, say, different than your grandmother's, which is the gold standard for you. Or are they the same? Is it the same recipe?
Oh, there's variation between my biscuits and my grandmother's biscuits. It really is the butter to lard ratio. So my biscuits are comprised of sugar, salt, butter, lard, buttermilk, and self-rising flour. That is so true Southern flour, soft wheat flour, like high quality 83% fat butter. Like whenever we can get heirloom leaf lard from small pig farms, like we use it if we can. But like that is what is comprising my biscuit, and my grandmother's is the same thing. It's just the ratio of lard to butter is different. She has a lot more lard in her biscuits than I do.
So you know what made me really happy when you did that? You said butter and lard. You didn't say either or. So I'm very happy to hear that. And then tell me about the buttermilk. Is it, fully leaded buttermilk, with all the fat and stuff, or is it more
fully leaded?
Okay. So how do you source your buttermilk?
So we source our buttermilk right now because of COVID. It's commodity buttermilk from whole fat buttermilk from the regional farms. But we try to be as local as possible. Our local farm is Marburg Farm, and that's in northern Kentucky, Cincinnati. I want to say I've seen it in Indiana a few times, but that is as local as we can get right now, with supply chains being broken and just everything else going on. But always true whole fat buttermilk. First cut, that extra virgin buttermilk. But we're never using low fat buttermilk ever.
Just to dig a little deeper into this. So what's so important about the butter to lard ratio?
So the importance of the butter to lard ratio actually starts with how you process and incorporate the butter. So we actually freeze our butter, and then we shred it while frozen into the smallest flex that we possibly can, because that even distribution of that shredded frozen butter allows for pockets of steam to form, as well as for an even distribution of melting factor to create that crumb of that biscuit. And without that super fine shred and without freezing the butter, you tend to have, biscuits that stick more. And there's nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with that. There's all kinds of different biscuits. Before anybody out there is like, hold up now, look here, chat. Like, nope, no, nothing wrong with it. If I don't have the ability to shred butter, like I always, I keep a microplane in my back pocket if I go on a trip. Just that way, I can, if I need to make biscuits on the fly, like I can just. But that's the important part with the butter. With the lard, it's important to make sure you have enough lard to keep the biscuits from sticking to the sheet pan, and then also to round out that flavor. Because even though lard, like it's very low salinity factor, almost non-existent most of the time when we get the lard that's been processed appropriately, there is still a touch. And so adding that small amount of salt balanced with the sugar on the lard, as long as the lard is pure, that's what creates the umami factor. Now, keeping that butter to lard ratio tight, because that lard is going to melt as well. But with the lard, like you want to make sure that you're like, whenever you're making pie crust and you use lard and you want to get those like really small pearls, that very small crumble for the lard, you want that as well here, but it'll end up distributing very evenly, or as evenly as possible, with that butter distribution. And so you have these little pockets, the butter melts, the steam is created, and then the lard, which also is slightly acidic, so it also helps with leavening factor when you add baking powder and baking soda. That lard also will melt in there, and these little just pockets of flavor, even though they're slightly hollow and like they're micro though, and they create more rise. But once you bite into that biscuit and, past that crunch of the outside layer and into the fluffiness that just kind of melts in your mouth, a biscuit is unforgiving, yet very forgiving. And it all has to do with whatever your process is and being consistent with your process. So being consistent with your process is what makes it forgiving. If you have like lower quality ingredients, or you can't get something specifically and you have to punt and use something else, keeping everything consistent in terms of your formula.
And what's the key to that golden brown color? Or should I say just golden color on a biscuit? What's the key to the golden color on a biscuit?
You were right on the golden brown. Like okay. It's golden brown. The key to that golden brown color is your heat point. So the heat point being about 425 degrees in a convection oven, and then 450 in a convention oven. And everybody out there is just like, that's too high, you gonna burn? Mm-hmm. No, they're only in the oven for like 8 to 10 minutes. Like mm-hmm. You can't rush it, but at the same time, you can't just not pay attention to it. Like you gotta finesse it. And I think that's all biscuits. I think that's a lot of quick breads in general. Like they have to be finessed. Because there's times where it's really cold in your house, and then there's times where it's really hot and humid in your house. And just like with bread, all of those are major factors in how your food turns out. So that golden brown color, especially if you have a convection oven, like it's a lot more consistent, because that 425 degrees is just hot enough to start browning on the top, and at the same time browning underneath. And then that lard is melting down into the bottom of that biscuit, so then it's not going to stick to that pan. And then also you have all of these steam pockets forming because you dispersed your butter the correct way. So then it doesn't take as long. You don't have to worry about sticky, undercooked biscuits in the middle.
Gotcha. And then why do you love flour so much?
I love soft wheat flour because not only is that the flour that I grew up with, but all of our testing, PJ and I's testing before we even really built Boomtown, we used every flour imaginable. And soft winter wheat flour is legit the only flour that was able to stand up to the expectation that we had in terms of light, fluffy, airy. I mean, because when we originally opened with a classic punched laminated biscuit. And while that's where my heart lied for so long, and like my heart was in that classic laminated fluffy round biscuit for forever. But then I made the choice to punt and switch to a drop biscuit because COVID, and I didn't have the labor, and labor is expensive.
So tell me, because you mentioned something I'd never heard of. So you said laminated biscuit versus a drop biscuit. I guess I've heard of the drop biscuit, but can you just tell us quickly what the differences are?
Yes. So a drop biscuit is where you incorporate all of your ingredients, bring your dough together. It's still fairly wet. It's not a stiff, resilient dough. It's a fairly wet, loose crumble dough that is just comes together. And then you would take a scoop or a spoon, and then you would take your scoop and then drop it onto your sheet pan, cookie tray, cookie sheet pan. Same thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas a laminated classic biscuit, and not everyone laminates them, but classic punched biscuit, round punched or square, we put it on the table, like we table the biscuit and then biscuit dough, and then we roll it out and then we fold it, with a little bit of flour in between the layers, about 7 to 11 times. And then so what that does, you have that shredded butter factor of those little pockets of steam creating more leavening and the lard, but then also you have this lamination. So it helps to make the biscuit rise, but also not only rise straight up, but then you have all of these little layers and you can peel that biscuit apart and just go to town.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thrown off a little bit because every time I hear laminated, I think of a plastic film over something.
Yeah, you're right. That or croissants is generally the only thing I ever hear. Like people like, oh, you real fancy now?
Yeah, you mentioned him earlier, but can you tell us a little bit more about your founding business partner, PJ?
Yes. So PJ Newman, he died January 18th of 2020. So right before the pandemic, right before the major shutdowns and quarantine. And we'd been friends for a number of years. And he had this dream of owning a biscuit restaurant. And, he kept trying to find the right space for it and find the right person to lead the culinary side. Like he was very passionate about food and beverage. One of the quickest bartenders in the city as well. But he really wanted to let a chef shine, as opposed to just, providing everything himself. And we collaborated on a number of things, as well as my first sous chef as well, who also is very passionate about Southern food. But he was really just wanting to tell this story. And, he had eaten a lot and traveled a lot. And he found that the brand experience was from start to finish. That was where he was most impressed and had the most memorable experience. But PJ and I would order half the menu anywhere we went. Like we would sit down and, the server would come out and how are we doing tonight? How are you doing today? And then PJ would just be like, I want 6 of the 12 appetizers. And they would just be like, oh, y'all going in. And then we would get 4 entrees. We wouldn't have any room for dessert. They come back over excited because they think that we're about to buy all the desserts and they about to get this money. And then I'd be like, nope, no desserts. But that's the best way to learn. Like I said, you eat everything.
And it's because of PJ's background that you decided to pair biscuits and whiskey. Did he come up with that?
He came up with that as part of the brand storyline that I mentioned before about the prospector story of going up on top of the mountain prospecting mess of biscuits and then coming down and jug of whiskey. And I mean, it's a fairly precarious combination. You don't always have people that want to drink themselves silly while eating breakfast. My staff does a great job of, balancing out the appropriate amount of spirits in cocktails that we have.
Tell me about the early years of running your restaurant. Any adversity, any hurdles?
It was a lot. I mean, talk about COVID. With being an independent restaurant, there's always the hurdles of getting open and then spending way too much money on labor, like everything, trying to figure out what it is that you're doing. And then the second one was, trying to figure out our true identity, because originally my restaurant was set up to be more of a slower paced fine dining, semi-fine dining brunch spot with the elements of cast iron and, aluminum pans and stuff. We still were going to elevate to a level beyond expectation. And then we realized in the first 3 weeks that that's not what people wanted. They wanted 15-minute ticket times. They wanted to sit down and find something and eat it because they treated it more like a greasy spoon, breakfast diner. Like that's what they originally treated it like.
Mhm.
So we had to overcome that hurdle. It was a lot. It was very humbling because there was a lot of me taking a lot of things off the menu, replacing them with more efficient, smaller items, things that were more efficient to build, more efficient to prep, and it was a lot. It wasn't quite as humbling and upsetting for me as changing the biscuit to the drop biscuit, but that was major. And then, compiling on from that, we figured it out. That's just how restaurants are. You figure something out and you feel like you're ahead, and then all of a sudden you're 52 steps behind. And it's nothing of your own accord. Sometimes it's just the way it is.
So it seems like in your career, you've been very enterprising. You got a lot of different things going on. So I'm just going to pick one of them. Tell me about the Christian Gill Culinary Gang.
The Culinary Gang came about during COVID, when essentially we were closed down for a number of weeks, and I still wanted to contribute to supporting all of the other local food and beverage businesses that were open, all my friends and associates and comrades. I wanted to contribute to that. And so I started a show of sorts, or I started a collective of PSAs called Feast Mode. And we basically would just guerrilla run and gun for 30 minutes in a restaurant. We'd film a bunch of B-roll of different dishes that they, might have wanted to highlight. We highlighted the chef or the owner, and then, got footage of people eating. And then while one of my friends he would go down and he would edit that. And then I would just do a track of narration to put underneath it. And we throw some music under it. And then we basically would just throw it on social media. And that was just to incentivize people to continue to go out and, patronize those restaurants. And then from there, I had some former producers from out west that were like, you should do a cooking show. All these people are doing cooking shows, from their house and stuff. You should do one. So I did. And it's called Shit in the Fridge because it was Rona. It was in the heat of it and you couldn't leave your house. And so we wanted to entertain people by showing them and inspiring them and motivating them to use their shit in their fridge and cabinets. And so you can check it out on Christian Gill's Culinary Gang on YouTube. There's all kinds of different episodes. We take stuff from the fridge and turn it into a romantic dinner for two with a nice apricot preserve glaze on crispy salmon. And then one of the things that we made sure to do is we always had a bunch of whimsy and stupid stuff. And then we always taught one lesson or one skill. And legit did not mean to form a social media content generating company. That was not the intention. The intention was to get out of the house and be productive for the industry. And then it turned into Christian Gill's Culinary Gang, which then became the umbrella company for my restaurants. And there's a lot of negative connotations and assumptions and stereotypes that are associated with gang, but I don't care because I didn't want to be called a group. This is we were a gang and I live in the hood and I don't care. It's always, I've learned from being ostracized from a lot of different groups growing up and not being accepted into anybody's clique. I learned that being myself was the best way to accept myself, was just to be myself and stop lying to myself about who I was. And so Culinary Gang, that's what it is. Gang. The gang. It's a gang of a bunch of skilled individuals that have one goal, and that is to season with confidence, which is our mission statement.
I forgot to mention this to you. So I call myself the Soul Food Scholar, and my mission statement is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits. So I even trademarked that.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
Biscuit goosebumps. Nice.
So tell me about your customers. Do you have any memorable customers?
Yes, there's a lot of them. There was this group that came all the way from Houston, and they came in, they sat down, and you could clearly tell that these black women had an expectation, and it was lower than what they expected. Like, they came in with low expectations, but they came in because they heard that it was a black-owned business, but they still came in like, I mean, people literally, you just go into a soul food joint, you're just like, I'm gonna see what they have, but like they ain't gonna have what I want. Like they ain't doing what I think they doing. Like I can already smell it because they ain't smell nothing. So no, like that's how they came in. They came in like that, and they just like they sat down, and I came out, and I was just like, "Hi, ladies." Like I wasn't their server, but I came out and made sure that I made it known that I was there. My grandmother's rolling pin that cracked me in the head is above the kitchen doors. Like I do my best to stay humble, and that all of the food is from scratch. And they ate and they ate and they ate. And like, I was just so proud because I wasn't cooking that day. I was in the dish pit. But like for my staff to be able to consistently roll out all of the things that, my chef de cuisine and I have worked so hard on, and to be able to impress, and they loved it. And then I went back out and I was like, okay, y'all can yell at me now. And like, no, they didn't. They were like, boy, why ain't you got one of these in Houston? You need to come to Houston. You need to come to Houston right now.
Oh man, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, that was one of the most memorable groups of guests that I've had.
Tell me about the items on your menu that your customers just go crazy for. So what are some of the most popular items?
The shrimp and grits. Like I mentioned the grits before, and the chicken stock, maple smoke, cheddar, all that. And then we make a Thai style coconut curry gravy that goes on top of those grits. And then on top of that is a lemongrass glazed shrimp. So it's a lot of Thai and South Asian Pacific influence into that dish, instead of just your traditional shrimp and grits. So they go crazy for that one. Our Oregon Trail, which is like our Korean sweet potato hash. And it can be made vegan as well. But that's a vegetarian dish that you can add like our Korean barbecue fried chicken, or you can add extra kimchi or short ribs, stuff like that. But people, especially vegetarians, they come in and that's almost always what they get. And then the number one thing that we sell at Boomtown is the Yukon, which is our buttermilk fried chicken sandwich, biscuit sandwich with our sawmill sausage gravy, maple smoked cheddar, crispy bacon. And then you put like an over easy egg on that sucker, and it just knocks people out like a light out.
Now, what does getting the grant from Southern Restaurants for Racial Justice, the Lee Initiative, and Heinz mean to you?
First, it means that, like I said before, it reaffirms that I'm doing something right. And not just doing something right from a restaurant perspective, but from trying to be a positive Black male role model, not only in my neighborhood, but on a national level. And not only on a national level, but within my industry. Trying to be environmentally conscious, trying to be, like I said, a positive role model, and just keep kids on track in my neighborhood. And it means that all of the time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears that I put into trying to just persevere through every hardship and every heartache, it just means that I'm doing something right.
Chef Gil, it was so great talking to you. Thank you for your time. And again, congratulations on being a recipient of this grant from Southern Restaurants for Racial Justice, the Lee Initiative, and Heinz.
Thank you. I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me talk too much.
That was my talk with Chef Gil from Boomtown. I, for one, feel much more well-versed on the intricacies of the lard to butter ratio in biscuit making. To hear more from Chef Gil, check out his own podcast, The Prep List, available wherever you get your podcasts. I think my work is done here. Take it easy, people. I'm out. This podcast has been brought to you by Heinz, the Lee Initiative, and Southern Restaurants for Racial Justice. You just heard from one of the more than 60 restaurants in our 2021 Black-owned restaurant cohort. To learn more about this partnership, visit theblackkitcheninitiative.com.